Namaste, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. If we can just all take a moment to make sure that we are muted out, there may be opportunities later in the workshop to unmute, particularly if we're having some conversation or some Q&A. But for now, if everyone can just take a moment to just make sure that your microphone is muted. And you may keep your camera on or off as you feel comfortable and are able to. But again, particularly when we have some opportunity for some group discussion or small group discussion, we want to ask, if at all possible, to have your cameras on for a richer discussion. We'll also just allow for a couple of more minutes as folks make their way into our Zoom room. We have quite a few folks who have registered for this workshop, and we're really grateful for that. And we also know that we're all coming from different things in our day, so we want to give some space and time for folks to join us if they're able to. So I'd like to take this opportunity to again welcome everyone, and of course to welcome our special guest. And I'll just say a few words about Gopal Patel, our guest speaker, just to give us some context. And we're so excited that he's able to be here with us. For those of you who may be newer to our program, my name is Vineet Chander, and I serve as an assistant dean in the Office of Religious Life here at Princeton University. On behalf of the Hindu Life program, which I direct here at Princeton, I am delighted to introduce our guest presenter this evening, Mr. Gopal D. Patel. Gopal is a faith-based environmental activist, campaigner, and consultant. For more than a decade, he has spearheaded environmental initiatives that engage religious communities and leaders across the world in India, East Africa, Europe, and North America. He is co-founder and director of Bhumi Global, which is a nonprofit organization that works to educate and mobilize Hindu communities globally for environmental action. He is co-chair of the United Nations Multi-Faith Advisory Council and is a member of the advisory board to the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. He also serves on the board of Interfaith Power and Light and is an advisor to the WWF Beliefs and Values program. Born and raised in England, Gopal studied computer science at Oxford Brookes University and then went on to complete a master's in humanities at King's College in London. He previously served as student's chaplain at Imperial College London and also worked as a program director at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies. In fact, it was at the Oxford Centre that Gopal first helped to develop Bhumi Global, then under the name Bhumi Project. Gopal is a recognized global leader in the faith-based environmental movement and has been honored for his work by the late Prince Philip at Buckingham Palace. He has spoken at the White House under President Obama, and he has been an advisor on religion and sustainable development to the United Nations. His writings have been featured in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and CNN. He contributed a chapter to the edited volume, Hindu Approaches to Spiritual Care, published in 2019, and most recently contributed to a publication by the Vatican celebrating the environmental leadership of Pope Francis. He currently lives in the New York City metro area. On a personal note, Gopal is a friend and colleague whom I've had the pleasure of collaborating with on a number of projects related to Hinduism, ecology, and social justice. I am now so delighted to turn things over to Gopal for tonight's insightful workshop. Let's give him a big, warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Vineet, for that introduction. And it's so wonderful to be with you and all the members of the Princeton Hindu Life program and the broader Hindu community this Monday evening, which is the first day of Earth Week, because on Friday we celebrate Earth Day. In fact, every day is really an Earth Day or should be an Earth Day, but this is the week we celebrate Mother Earth specifically. And so I'm happy to be joining you tonight to start our celebrations this week, where we honor and give thanks to all the gifts that Mother Earth gives us. Tonight will be hopefully an interactive discussion-based session for the next hour. The organization that I run, called Bhumi Global, we say that caring for the earth is not a spectator sport. It requires everybody's full participation. We'll be launching a podcast later this year, and the working title so far for our podcast is All Hands on Deck. That to care for Mother Earth, to address the climate change crisis, everybody needs to step up and step forward to do what they can. And so I'm really hoping and looking forward to rich participation by all of you here tonight. So the way this session is going to go this evening is that I will speak hopefully for no longer than about 15 or 20 minutes max, to kind of lay some foundational groundwork or some ideas. And then we'll break out into little breakout rooms here on Zoom to kind of have a bit more discussion and brainstorming around how we can all increase our care for Mother Earth. And then we'll come back together in the session as a whole and share ideas, share further discussions, and then I'll end with some closing remarks as well. So that's what we plan for today. It would be great to know where you're all calling in from. So if you are able to, please do put who you are and where you are and what you do, and anything else that you think may be of interest for us in the chat box, so we know where you're calling in from. And if you can put on your videos at some point, that'd be great as well, because it's always nice to see people's lovely smiling faces. So let me start off with my my presentation. I'm going to share my screen now, and if you have any questions during my presentation or anything that's mentioned tonight, there will be time for Q&A after I finish my presentation. Before we do the breakout groups, we'll pause for a couple of minutes to see if there are any questions or comments before we continue on. So let me see if I can get this right. Share my screen. Vineet, you'll have to tell me if this is visible. If I'm not, thumbs up. Yep,
Good.
Great, fantastic. All right, so so here we are, exploring Hindu texts as guides for environmental action, green Dharma. Okay, let's see, where we go. Okay, and so as I said, the session today is really for, I really want to offer some framings and some ideas to help us think about in our own lives, in our own communities, how we could become more environmentally friendly, how we could increase our action, our activism, our advocacy, and our care for the earth. And so that is what these remarks will be, that I'll be sharing over the coming minutes. Okay, let me see if it gets ready. I thought it'd be nice to start with a little short, I wouldn't say a prayer, but a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam to kind of set the tone for tonight. This one reads that the ether, the air, the fire, water, the earth, the planets, and all creatures, all directions, trees and plants, rivers and seas, that they are all organs of God's body. And that remembering this, a devotee respects all species. And I thought that was a beautiful way to start tonight's session, that the understanding that everything is sacred, everything is connected to the body of God. And then as devotees of God, that we have a responsibility to care for all of these species, and not just the animals, but also the plants and the trees, the rivers and the oceans. Everything is all connected and all sacred and all divine. And I think that's a beautiful way to envision or imagine and understand the natural world. But we do know that there is an environmental crisis going on right now. And I want to share a little bit, just so we're all on the same page, about what is happening to our sacred Mother Earth right now. The first major issue that's going on, and I'm sure we're all familiar with this, is that of climate change. And I'm not going to get into too much detail because I'm sure we're all aware of the science, or we can all go away and read up on the science and the impacts and the effects of climate change. But in essence, climate change is caused by the burning of fossil fuels, which release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which then warm the planet significantly. And this has been going on really since the late 1800s, starting with the Industrial Revolution from the country where I was born in the United Kingdom, I think in the city of Birmingham, actually in the Midlands. And so since then, since the late 1800s, we've been burning fossil fuels significantly, and especially in the last 50 to 70 years on at an exponential level. And the warming of the planet, what that does is that it fundamentally changes and shifts ecosystems and the natural world. And so what we will experience going forward, and even we experience today, are extreme and erratic weather patterns and conditions, increasing droughts, wildfires, and crop failures in all parts of the world. And because of these environmental pressures on societies, on people, we are now starting to see civil unrest, refugees, and migration of people because they are fleeing or they are fighting over natural resources or the lack thereof. One of the most, unfortunately, one of the most popular examples of this is that the conflict in Syria, when it started now many, many years ago, Syria underwent 3 years of record drought, which had caused internal displacement and pressure on people. And so when the conflict happened, there was already a level of angst in society there. And you see that also in South America with migration due to climate change. And even here in the United States, you're now seeing and hearing of people moving away from certain parts of the country because they know that in the next 20 to 50 years, their land will be covered by the ocean, or that insurance companies won't insure their property, or that they know that it's not going to be a good place to live in a couple of generations' time. And so you're seeing also, even here in the United States, climate migration happening. So that's climate change, the burning of fossil fuels that raises the temperature of the planet. The second issue, which doesn't get as much attention, but is equally as important, is what is called the biodiversity crisis or biodiversity loss. Biodiversity is a fancy way of saying the natural world, as I talked about earlier in that quote from the Bhagavatam, the animals, the birds, the plants, the trees, the oceans, everything that is natural and wild, we call biodiversity or biodiverse. And what has happened since the 1970s is that we have seen a 2/3 decline in all species all over the world. Now, in nature, there's a natural rate of extinction that takes place due to just natural circumstances. But again, since the 1970s, we've seen a rate of extinction which is about 100 to 1,000 times what is normal. So the species and wildlife is being degraded at an unbelievable level. A couple of examples just to like paint a picture, and not a very nice picture, is that here in the United States or in North America, over the last 50 years, over 3 million birds have been lost to biodiversity loss. In Latin America and the Caribbean, 94% of all biodiversity has been lost since 1975. And so what we've been seeing since the 1970s is, in addition to climate change, is that the very fabric of life, our oceans, our trees, our mountains, the animals and the insects have all been dying off at an unbelievable rate. And this, unfortunately, is caused, again, just as climate change is, biodiversity loss is caused by human behavior, by us encroaching or over-exploiting natural lands and natural resources, polluting oceans and rivers and other lands. And climate change as well does affect biodiversity and biodiversity loss as well. And so these are two of the biggest environmental crises that the world is facing right now. And it's a little bit worrying. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we feel when we see and we hear and we know what is going on around us? It's not, I'll be honest, it's not a great feeling. It's not good knowing that this is the world that we have created and this is the world that is coming. And I think for many of us, we will feel a sense of dread, maybe a sense of shame or guilt, but overwhelmingly a sense of worry and alarm and sadness, but also a desire to kind of maybe do something to help the situation. And this feeling of almost paralysis of not knowing what to do next is very similar to how Arjun felt in the Bhagavad-gita. I'm not going to go into like the full context of the Bhagavad-gita. I'm assuming there's some level of understanding amongst all of us about what the Gita is. But in essence, and this particular image which I'm showing here, is that in the battle, as the battle is about to start in the Bhagavad-gita, Arjun essentially has a mental breakdown where he asks his charioteer Krishna to take his chariot in the middle of the two armies. And you see in this picture here, Arjun says that his bow and his arrow are slipping from his hands. In this image, he is crying and he does not know what to do. He is literally paralyzed. He does not know what to do because he's overwhelmed by grief, overwhelmed by what is going to happen if he does what he thinks he has to do. And then what happens after that is Krishna and Arjun have a conversation, a discussion about what Arjun's activities and what his response should be to the current situation. And so Arjun's predicament at that time, when the Gita was spoken, I see very strong parallels to our predicament right now, or for many of us, where we are overwhelmed by the environmental crisis and we don't know where to start in order to make some positive change. So what I want to propose is that we have to make a plan of action. There's that cheesy line that says, if you fail, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? And so we all have to make some kind of plan in our life for everything we do. And that's even more so now when we're at the cusp of a major ecological crisis in the world. So let's make a plan of action. And what is happening at the international level when it comes to making a plan of action to address climate change? I'm sharing these so that we can get a sense of that not all hope is lost, that there is action happening. There are plans in place to address the climate change crisis. And so we must be all familiar with the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, where every country in the world agreed to limit warming of the planet by 1.5 degrees by the end of this century, by 2100. And so that target is off track, if I'm honest. And, you know, well, I'm not, if I'm honest, the data is out there, we can find out for ourselves. But that's not to say that there is a plan, right? And the plan consists of every country developing action plans, every country reviewing those plans every 5 years, those plans being transparent, the data being available for everyone to see. And so the last review of the action plans were in Glasgow at the end of last year at the United Nations conference there. You know, and every plan has to include a number of things, primarily a reduction of carbon emissions, and then how to adapt, how a country is going to adapt to the impacts of climate change, and how a country is going to help finance the changes that they need to make in order to address climate change. So there's a plan of action. It's called the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. It's the best chance we have at a global level of addressing climate change. Oh. And when it comes to biodiversity loss, which was the second issue or concern that I mentioned, right now, the United Nations is in the middle of drafting a brand new 10-year framework to address biodiversity loss. They just met 2 weeks ago in Geneva for 2 weeks to continue the drafting process. The UN are going to meet again in Nairobi at the end of June. And then most likely at the end of August or sometime at the end of this year, they'll meet again in China to finalize and adopt this new 10-year framework. And it's called the Global Biodiversity Framework. And it will be the newest and the best framework that the United Nations has ever put together with the input of every country of the world to address the loss of biodiversity. And these are some of the key aspects of it that I think are really important to share, is that there's one aspect of it is like increased financing, making sure the money goes to the right places in the right way to ensure biodiversity is not lost. A strong implementation mechanism, making sure that countries and the private sector and civil society can all be involved in the implementation of this new framework. And what's really important about this new framework is also protecting the rights of indigenous peoples and their communities and their land. It is shocking that although indigenous peoples only make up 5% of global population, they protect 80% of all global wildlife, or sorry, all global biodiversity. 5% protect 80%. It is staggering. And so there's a strong component of the global biodiversity framework to ensure the rights and indigenous peoples are at the table when any discussions or conversations are had about their land and the protecting of biodiversity on their land. So a plan is at hand for both climate change and biodiversity loss. And so, as I said, not all hope is lost. We can still turn the tide, turn the ship, and move in the direction where the earth can restore and replenish herself and provide abundance for all. But this is a talk about how we can use the Bhagavad-gita as a framework for action. And, you know, I've been a student of the Gita now for about 20 years, I think. And over the last 10 years or so, the more I've read it, I had conversations with people about it, the more I've understood that there are ideas there that can help us address environmental issues. And so what I'm going to do now is present two ideas from the Gita that I think could lend themselves for action, and then we're going to break out into our groups. The first idea that I think is helpful for us is that the Gita places immense emphasis on knowledge, on education. I mentioned earlier that Arjun has a bit of a mental breakdown, and he submits to Krishna, who is driving his chariot. Arjun says that I am now your student, you're my teacher, please tell me what to do. So immediately a scenario is set up where Arjun is receiving knowledge and Krishna is giving knowledge. And what happens in the Gita is like there is a progression of knowledge. It is not that Krishna gives Arjun everything he needs to know in like the first 5 minutes, and then they go and do something else. No, Krishna understands the mind and the heart of Arjun. And so therefore he slowly gives and shares knowledge to Arjun so that he can progressively understand higher and more important truths. Very much like as we go through school and then high school and university, there is a progression of knowledge, right? We don't teach algebra to 2-year-olds because they don't understand it. So there's a progression of knowledge in our life. And also in the context of the Gita, there's a progression of knowledge throughout the text. And a progression of 2 different types of knowledge, not just spiritual knowledge, but also material knowledge as well. Krishna gives a sense of spiritual reality, of spiritual truths, an understanding of the self, an understanding of God, an understanding of the nature of reality. But Krishna also gives an understanding of how to act in the world. Krishna gives an understanding of what is good behavior, what is destructive behavior, what is behavior that uplifts, what is behavior that degrades us as individuals. And so there are different kinds of knowledge available there in the Gita. And there's I find it really interesting because Arjun is a warrior, that Krishna uses this phrase in the 4th chapter in the 42nd text where he says, use the sword of knowledge or the weapon of knowledge to cut down any ignorance that you may have. And so that is the power of knowledge according to the Bhagavad-gita. And so when it comes to the environmental issues that we're talking about today, knowledge is key. We live in an age of disinformation where truths are untruths and untruths are truths. But using the Gita as our guide, can we cut through all the rhetoric and really get to the heart of the truths around what is going on with our planet, the environment, and our impact on it? So knowledge is such an important aspect if we are to make any kind of action plan when it comes to caring for the earth. The second idea is that of devotion. Really in the Gita, I was thinking about it today, the story of the Gita as a text, it doesn't work if there is no love and if there's no relationship between Krishna and Arjun. That is so fundamental to the Gita's beauty that they start off, initially they're friends outside of the Gita in the Mahabharata. And then in the Gita, Krishna takes a lower position and offers to drive Arjun's chariot. And then by the end, Krishna reveals himself to be the supreme Godhead, the supreme person, and Arjun submits himself to be his disciple. And so love and relationship, care and respect are such an intrinsic part of the Bhagavad-gita, and it doesn't work without it. And I would say that when it comes to us addressing environmental issues, we have to have this love, we have to have this relationship, we have to have this respect for the natural world, for the environment, if we are to make our own action plans and try to do what we can to protect Mother Nature. Krishna says that life is an offering, you know, and I find that really beautiful. He says that always think of me, become my devotee. He says, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, do that as an offering to me. So Krishna is really saying here that life is meant for serving. And he says we can all do something. There is a beautiful couple of verses in the 12th chapter between text 6 and 12, where Krishna tells Arjuna, this is the highest form of spirituality. But if you can't do that, here's something else you can do. And if you can't do that, here's something else, and here's something else, and here's something else. He's not giving Arjuna black or white options. He's not saying either do this or do nothing. He's saying there are different levels, because people are at different levels of different parts in their life, different levels of intellect and consciousness. And so everybody has a role to play. We can all do something. And so devotion, love, and I think if we were to examine our own lives, love is the root of all action, right? The love we have for our family members, for our partners and children, the love we have for our country, even the love we may have for our profession. It is a connection that drives action. And so therefore, I want to offer that a connection of love and relationship with the natural world, with the earth, is what should be driving our desire to heal Mother Earth. So that's my offering, that the Bhagavad-gita offers a framework for environmental action. And I want to say, let's focus our minds when we go into our breakout rooms towards 2030, over the next 8 years or so. What can we do over the next 8 years by 2030, armed with knowledge, armed with devotion, just as in the Gita, to really uplift ourselves and our communities to take better care of the environment? And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Vineet, hopefully you're still there, and you can put us into our breakout rooms where we will continue the conversation.
Thanks, Gopal. I'm going to go ahead and put us into breakout rooms. This may just take a minute or two. I know some folks may be following us along in a situation where, they've dialed in and they can't quite participate in the breakout room. If that's the case, please let me know. But otherwise, you will get a message that just prompts you to go into a breakout room. And we're dividing into 2 rooms. Is that right, Gopal?
I think so. Yeah, I think that'd be good. And I just want to say thank you to all of you who put your names in the chat. It's great to see so many environmental activists and leaders coming together tonight. That's really great to see. Thank you, Vineet. So we'll be in our groups now. Want to share any reflections from your group?
Sure. In the interest of time, I guess I can share. I was kind of taking notes on the Google Doc, but I want to invite other group members. Hang on one second. I want to invite some of the other group members to fill in anything I may have missed or to add anything. But we had a really, I thought, really rich discussion. And again, I feel like we could have also just gone on for, at least another hour or so, just, kind of talking about this. And before I get into some of the specifics, I also want to lift up something that one of our group members, Andrea or Ananya, made this point of kind of intentionally keeping the conversation going, kind of intentionally cultivating a community around just this idea, Gopal, that you've raised up for us. So I thought that was a really wonderful insight. Some of the specific things we talked about, some specific ideas, planting trees came up, and particularly, well, the action of planting the tree, but also the mood and the mindset of seva, of service, in providing shade and service to others, to future generations. We talked a little bit about mindfulness around the use of product materials that are used in Hindu practices, worship gatherings. So moving further and further away from products like plastics and of course styrofoam to things really kind of returning to the tradition's own more eco-friendly products like banana leaf plates or bamboo, connecting to existing initiatives that several communities and sanghas have going, being intentional about eco-friendly worship and images, moving towards recyclable images like Hindu art calendars and wedding invitations, making sure those items can be recycled, growing organic local vegetables and fruits, both in terms of farming as well as more like urban gardens. And we've kind of connected that to some of the references in texts like the Gita about offering, to the divine fruits and flowers and leaves. The act of intentionally praying to Mother Earth while watering, while composting. And we talked about just how powerful composting can be. In one community, one of our group members was sharing that composting has literally reduced their garbage waste by more than 90%. And then one thing that I thought was a really kind of a nice share in our group was the idea of intentionally reconnecting with nature and the natural world, even in seemingly very small ways. So kind of overcoming this tendency to think that everything has to be huge, large scale, but even in small ways, intentionally reconnecting ourselves with the natural world, and then that kind of inspiration spreading. So even things like sending out, greetings with photos of nature, constructing or maintaining things like bird feeders, so that we have this like daily connection with the natural world, with other living beings, other species, and just in these small ways, really kind of keeping ourselves connected to nature. If any of my group members would like to add, please go ahead and unmute yourselves.
You said it all, Vineet. Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi. Thanks so much to our group for your input.
Great. So many great things. I love the idea. I mean, I just love that it came out. I was really hoping this would come out, but just like an emphasis on just reconnecting with traditional ways of doing things, but also just reconnecting with the earth. I think it's something that we lose so much in our day-to-day life. And I'm so excited and happy that it came out in your conversation. And one common thread, well, one idea that came out in ours, which came out in yours, which is around the composting. We had one of our members whose family members keep chickens. And so the chickens take care of the wet compost. And so I made the comment that in India, you keep cows, in New Jersey, you keep chickens, and that's how you can live a more green lifestyle. But other ideas that came through in our discussion was around educating people around like the number of things. Oftentimes we move towards recycling or certain things, but there are so many things people can do when it comes to caring for the earth. So just raising awareness and educating people about that. A lot of discussion around educational resources and programming for schools and for young children, really trying to educate them at a young age about the importance of caring for the earth. And then for us who are a little bit older and aren't in school anymore, educational programs for us, maybe more gatherings like this, maybe more thematic, so maybe, today we're talking about in the environment and faith, maybe we can bring in a more like business angle and like other angles as well to kind of really see how we can green all aspects of our life. I think that was something that came across quite strongly. This idea, as you said, Vineet, in your group, of relearning the old ways. It's only been a couple of generations since we were doing things in a more environmentally friendly way. And so to relearn those practices. And I think one thing which was really nice that came out at the end, I forgot who mentioned it, but that in the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, if you don't fight, you still have to anyway. And it's like you're compelled to act whether you want to or not, and that's a really strong message of the Gita. And so one of the thrusts in the Gita is act with the right intention, act with the right consciousness. And so, we're all going to have to respond to the environmental crisis, and so we have an option, we have a choice. Either we do it consciously and in a positive way, or we have to respond when it comes to, threaten our livelihood and our way of being. And so I love that point at the end that came out, that we have to act regardless of what we do. So those are, I think, some of the key things. Anyone from our group want to add anything else that I may have missed or want to emphasize any of those points?
Hi, this is Renu. Thanks very much for the insights you shared, especially linking the Bhagavad-gita to what environmentalists have been talking about these days. It's really very insightful. I have been associated with Sierra Club for some time, and I noticed that the club itself does a lot to promote Earth Day. So with the Earth Day coming, I think Princeton areas, and I live in Montgomery Township, so we do have an Earth Day, which is on May 1st. So those of you who are listening and would like to be part of that, you're welcome to come and join us in Montgomery Township's fair. So that was just more like an announcement, and encourage you to join the community and do something. And I do have a question for you. I know we're running out of time, but I fail to see major initiatives taken out. We do have Earth Day Fair in the township, but I see very few people who are regularly involved in any kind of activity to help the community move forward. And as a community ourselves, being part of the community, I see that very less is being done. Some of us, we do little initiatives here and there, but what more can be done to promote environmentalism, and also being more proactive within our communities and families to bring the message to the younger generations? This is a great forum, of course, and we appreciate it very much, but very few people join, as you can see, and not much is coming to forefront, I would say, at least not I see. Any suggestions as to how we, as being members of the community, can help bring such kind of actions within our community and encourage it more and more?
Sure. Yeah, I'll respond briefly, Renu. Thanks for the plug for your event, and a great question. I think it's a really important question, and I think that's something that we all struggle with. We are concerned about the environment, and we all want to do more, want others to do more. I'll offer two suggestions. I think the first thing is that Vineet, not to put the pressure on you, but maybe we can set up a follow-up call, for those who are interested, to kind of get into this in a bit more and brainstorm ideas and see if we can create some kind of collective connected to the Hindu Life program that wants to do more in the community. And then I think the other thing is, which was mentioned in our group, which is, finding the pressure points for different people that would make them interested in the conversation, right? And so for some people, it'll be, protecting and making sure their children have a future. For other people, it will be making sure their business meets their sustainability guidelines of the government or the business associations they're part of. So everybody has an interest in the environment, whether they know it or not. And I think it's up to us who are already in this space to work out what the language is, what the hook is that would get someone at a table to have a conversation about it. I think we have to really make it local and really have to speak to people's needs. And by doing that, we can really open up the conversation in beautiful ways. So those would be my two brief responses.
Yep, great points. Thank you.
You're welcome, Renu. Thank you. We are over time, so we're going to wrap up now. There's much more to be said, as always. But I'm really, really grateful to Vineet for convening us, putting us together tonight for this really beautiful discussion at the beginning of Earth Week. Thank you all for your contributions and your thoughts and bringing your whole selves into the conversation, and I'm looking forward to what comes next. And please always do consider me a friend and an ally in this work. Vineet, back over to you.
Thanks, Gopal, and thank you everyone for joining us. I put it into the chat box, but I will go ahead and follow up, at least over email, with an invitation to keep the conversation going. And I'd be happy to connect you to Gopal. I know Gopal is always happy to be in touch with folks directly. So we are interested in keeping the conversation going. Of course, because the Hindu Life program serves a wider community, and now, as we all learned during these last couple of years in the pandemic, community doesn't necessarily have to mean in person. It could also include a kind of a virtual or remote community. We're thinking more and more about what that really means to serve a community beyond the sort of geographical limitations of Princeton. So whether you live in town, whether you're connected to the university or not, we're really thinking about how to cultivate intentional communities. So we're going to work on it, and Gopal and I have some conversations about working on it on the level of students, undergraduate students and grad students who may serve as kind of, you could say, sort of green Dharma ambassadors, and that way can also kind of, you know, spread the word and share the message among other students, because student to student communication we found is really the best way of getting, you know, students activated. But also this group, you know, we're really happy to kind of keep the conversation going. So look out for that. I also want to encourage everyone. I don't want it to get lost in the chat box. Ron, maybe you could put it again. But if you are interested in a really dynamic project right here in Princeton, if Princeton is kind of home to you locally, our dear friend Ron and some of the other community members on this call are active with an eco-village project, setting up a sustainable eco-village right here in Princeton. So please be in touch with Ron about that if you're interested in learning more, or perhaps in helping out. And again, let's you know, keep this green Sangha going, not just for Earth Week, but as Gopal said in the beginning, making every day Earth Day, making every week Earth Week. And so with that, I thank you all again, and I wish you a very happy rest of your week, and looking forward to the conversations to come. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.